Welcome to you both. You guys have sort of moved in opposite directions in your careers in terms of affordable and market rate. So Ron, I just want to start with you. You could be building luxury condos and selling $100 million penthouses. Why did you get into affordable, and how have you seen it change over the last, couple of years?
Many years.
Many years.
So I've been doing this over 35 years, and I got into affordable for a few reasons. When we started our company, it was just me and my partner. We didn't have a lot of capital. We were starting a business during the Koch administration. The buzzword then was not so much affordable, but redevelopment in neighborhoods that had been devastated in the 70s, had a lot of vacant buildings, city-owned housing stock, and we found it to be an area that we could get into, which we didn't need a lot of capital for. Also was intellectually really interesting. Figuring out ways to build affordable housing back then was a challenge, was especially an intellectual challenge. And I found it to be personally appealing to my sense of what made me making a difference in the real estate.
I know that you've called yourself more of a math guy than a design guy. Is that sort of what you're getting at, the complexities of putting a deal together?
Yeah, I'm not a great design guy, but I do really get interested in the math and the underwriting. And at that time, we were doing everything. We were doing the interviewing of the families who were coming into the housing. I felt it was really personally satisfying from a mission standpoint. So that's how we got in for those 3 or 4 reasons. And then it continued to be a business that was thriving and tremendous need for it. And again, lower risk, lower capital, and high degree of intellectual capacity, and fairly good barriers to entry over the time. So.
And you've more recently gotten into the market rate world. Has the affordable world become more competitive, and has that been one of the things that has driven you into the market world, or is it just that you've got more capital now?
Well, it's a little of both, but the affordable world has gotten much more competitive. Again, when I got in the mid to late 80s, it was right around the time that Reagan passed the '86 Tax Act. The low-income tax credit came into being, and the entire world of affordable housing changed from heavily federally subsidized large projects to public-private tax-driven projects. So we were at the outset. There wasn't a lot of competition. Over the last 30 years, it's gotten incredibly competitive. There's an industry that's built up around it. You get smart young guys like David and others coming into the business. So even though the city's doing more and more affordable housing, they're spreading it out. And to grow a business, I don't think you can rely purely on government programming and public-private. So we started getting more into the private sector.
David, let's get you into the conversation. Slate is obviously also a for-profit developer with a foot in both worlds. But you've taken more affordable projects on lately. Did you make sort of a conscious pivot to go deeper into the affordable world?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to thank Ron for still calling me young, so I appreciate that.
It's all relative.
Yeah, well, I'll take what I could get at this point. So Slate, we started Slate building in Brooklyn. I was born and raised in Brooklyn and didn't have any money, so I couldn't buy anything in Manhattan. I like to think that it was a great strategic decision, but it really was, 2004, you could still sign a contract with a $25,000 soft deposit. And then, as we began developing, we realized how complicated the city was back in '07 and '08 with inclusionary housing and everything. Then the market fell apart in 2009. And I literally had no development projects to do, and I saw these guys, L&M, were building everything, and I said, wow, what's going on here? What are these guys up to?
It all comes full circle.
Yeah, so I realized that, affordable housing is a great business from the standpoint that it's a steady business. There's so much more need than supply. There's always a need for it. The rents are so below market, and there's every time you do a lottery, 80,000 people apply, 100,000 people apply. So there's so much need And the one negative of the market rate development is its peaks and valleys. So, everything's great, everything's terrible, everything's great, everything's terrible. And as a developer, that's a hard way to run a business, where things are great, you're doing a lot of business, and then no business, and a lot and no business. So we saw it as a really natural hedge. And then on the other side of us, we also said, you know what, it's a great thing to do. It makes you can run a business that also makes you feel good. When you build these apartments for people that really need it, it's a great feeling that you can actually do good and make money. So, it's a nice thing. When you see somebody that wins this apartment and wins a lottery and moves into a building, you really change somebody's life. So it's a great feeling also.
So do you think it's sort of a key hedge against a recession, against a downturn? And if so, do you expect more developers to get into this space going forward?
So I think that people are so interested in this arena right now. Again, I don't know if it's a sign of the times where development's gotten really, really tough, with costs escalating and cap rates and, condos falling off a cliff. So I think people are certainly very interested now. Whether they'll have the staying power to get into it, it's a high barrier to entry business. You have to really understand, the financing is way more complicated, the regulation is more complicated. So, I think I can tell you that I had lunch yesterday with a major family office and pension fund, and they were so interested in affordable housing just because there's such a need.
Do you want to tell us who that was?
It would cost a lot of money. No way I could say that.
Do you think, Ron, that affordable housing is sort of like a good point of entry for people getting into development, or, which is how you got your start, or is it just that it's so complicated that it's maybe not?
I think from a capital source point of view, it is a good point of entry because you don't need a lot of capital. You can do affordable housing without having huge balance sheets. One of the issues today is there's a lot of capital out there, even in the market, so people can get into the market business, and there's a lot of available capital there. And from a barrier to entry, it's complicated. There is a learning curve. I've always, when people come to me and say they want to be in this business, I've always suggested, especially for younger, folks coming out of school, take a few years, go into government, work for a housing agency, work for city planning, work for city hall, get a feel for what the political process is, get an understanding. You'll get a much better understanding of how to underwrite and all the complexity around the programs, and come out with a good background in that, and I think it really helps. But I do think it's an area where there's not enough people going into the business, and I think it is a good place for people to form a career.
You one time told The Real Deal that you would consider going into government. Is that?
I think what I said was I regretted not doing it when I was younger. I'm not sure at this stage it's an easy thing to transition to. So.
I think it would just be a good idea to sort of take a step back and hear from you both what you consider affordable. Obviously, there's a wide, income range that we think about when we think about affordable. But what are you guys referring to? David?
I think it's a good question. I don't think there's one. I think anything that's below market would fall under that umbrella. So we're doing everything from homeless, all the way up to middle income. I think, in New York for a long time, there wasn't a need for sort of affordable middle income because it was naturally occurring. In the 90s, you could move to Harlem, you could move to Bed-Stuy, you could even move to Williamsburg and find places to live. Now there are just fewer and fewer places that you could just move to if you're not making a lot of income. So there's a need across the board. So that's sort of the way that we look at it. I think one thing that we're hoping, there's a lot of things we're hoping, but one that comes to mind is that there'll be more home ownership affordable options that I know Ron has done previously, which are much harder to do now. There really are very, very few of those, but I think that's an area that we'd love to figure out more home ownership affordable options.
Ron, what kind of development fees do you generally see with affordable, and how does that compare to the profit margins at market rate?
Well, the way you make money in affordable housing is through fees. So there's no quote profit, there's no promotes, there's no, they're eliminating the ability, and probably should eliminate the ability for the private sector to really make gain on affordable housing. The city is starting to has put in place financing mechanisms where they really control the property. Even if it's not called permanently affordable, they'll control the property because of the subsidy programs and accrued interest on the subsidies and enforcement liens, all these tools they have to control the property well beyond whatever compliance period is in there. So the way we make money is in development fee. So in a market rate job, you might get a 4%, maybe a 5% development fee, but you get a promote, or you're participating in the profit that you hope to make, or the sale of the condos, or whatever the profit center is. Whereas in affordable housing, generally they will give you somewhere between a 10 and a 15% developer fee. Probably half to a third of that is paid, so you probably get around the same 5% fee paid when you're building it or finished building it, and the other 5 or 10% would be paid over, say, a 10 or 15-year period.
Is that just sort of dependent on, how efficient you are and how sort of, within budget you stay?
Yeah, there's some dependency on efficiency, and there's some programmatic desire on the part of government to incent you to stay with the project, so they want to pay you over time as opposed to upfront.
I think there is, though, a public perception that affordable housing is a space where you can make money as a developer, and there's, maybe from, the advocacy side, a feeling of criticism on that. What would your response be to that?
Well, I think you definitely can make money in affordable housing. It's a public-private. That's why there is a public-private aspect to it. I think a lot of the advocates who are in the affordable housing business are also interested in building affordable housing, and in order to sustain their operations, they also need to make money, because it's a complex business with a lot of asset management and other aspects of real estate involved. So if you don't make money, you're not going to do a good job. If you don't generate cash flow in the properties, they won't be sustainable. So I think the criticism from the from the housing advocates is that they don't have a big enough piece of the affordable housing action. And I think there's some truth to that, and I think the city's trying to work through some of those issues of whether they have capacity to build the larger projects. I think they're starting to get up to capacity. I think the second criticism about making money in affordable housing is the profit center on affordable housing. I think what a lot of advocates object to is the fact that when a project goes out of compliance, if you've held it for like the Mitchell-Lamas or some of even the tax credit, if you've held them for 30 years, and they're in places like Harlem, which 30 years ago were not high-value neighborhoods, now they are high-value neighborhoods, the owner of that affordable housing project can make a lot of money, maybe what some would call windfall. And I think that criticism, while I can see both sides of the coin, I think that's where a lot of that criticism comes from.
What do you think about just the idea of permanent units? I know at Essex Crossing, a lot of the affordable units there are permanent. How do we sort of solve the affordable housing crisis if units are not permanently affordable?
You want me to take that?
David, why don't you jump
go
in?
for that, Ron.
All right.
I'm going to pass to you.
So at Essex Crossing, half of the apartments are permanently affordable. It's mixed income housing. And in mixed income housing, like 80-20s or even 50-50s, you have the support of a market rate component to prop up and support the affordable component. And therefore, permanent affordability can work. I think it's still a challenge, but it can work if it's underwritten properly. When you have 100% low income, and when you have deeply low income, the rents barely cover the operating expenses. And if you start trending rents and operating expenses out 15, 20, 30 years, you're underwater. So one of the problems with deeply affordable projects is they will need operating subsidy at some point in the future. When you go then to permanent affordability, you're talking about how do you do CapEx when you need CapEx? what is the interest of the owner in staying involved in that property? The last thing the city wants to do is take over affordable housing projects. So I think that the balance on permanent affordability is, how do you balance incentives, the difficulty of running properties in New York City, the ability to put CapEx in when you need it, with the idea that you're never going to have any value at the back end of that property.
Well, it's interesting because the city is, hitting a lot of affordable milestones, but they're also getting criticized for building more towards middle income and not towards, lower income, where, I guess you could argue that it maybe needed even more. Is it, that much, it seems like you were just outlining this, but, harder for developers to build lower income affordable?
It's funny, and you can take it after this, but it's funny that the city does get some criticism, and there are some people there's very little you can do in New York City that someone's not out there criticizing. We live in a city with a lot of opinions, and to some degree there is some valid criticism in the way the middle income housing may be done and the mixed income, and maybe in places where the 130% units are over market, as David pointed out, maybe someone could, can reconsider things like that. But the idea that us as the affordable housing developers, we're pretty agnostic as to whether we build 100% very low income or mixed income. The way the city programs work, you probably put less money in, less equity, and make bigger developer fees in the really low-income projects than you do in the mixed income.
And you take less risk
Right.
sometimes. So, I think, to add on to what Ron said, a lot of it's driven by what the city wants. Now, unfortunately, for the city's standpoint, it's hard, right? The people that are upset about something are the ones that get out there, and the people that have something are not. So we now live in a world where everybody needs affordable housing except for the people that are making, a tremendous amount. So if you're a school teacher that's making, we don't talk about AMIs, we talk about people. So we say if you're a fifth-year school teacher and you're making $90,000 a year and you have 2 kids, you can't afford to live in Crown Heights in a market rate place, so you need something. So for somebody, they say, well, $90,000, that's a lot of money. To somebody that's making 30, so the $30,000 person needs some subsidy and some help, and the $90,000 person needs it. And it really comes down to the resources, how the city wants to distribute those resources. Where do they want to put that? And, how do they, you have low-income housing tax credits, so you have federal money, you have state money, you have city money. And it's, the city comes out with their ideas and their term sheets, and then as developers, we go out and execute them. So we are either agnostic or even prefer to do the lower income because there's no risk that you're not going to rent an apartment that's $800 a month, right? But if you go out and you do a middle income apartment in the Bronx, you might be a $2,000 2-bedroom, there might be some market risk that we have to take, or our investors or others, look to us that, oh, what do you do if you don't rent that apartment, or if it takes longer, or if there's some vacancy?
I'm going to just hop around a little bit and switch gears to talk about Nycha and the push for privatization. Nycha is considering tapping developers to handle the management of tens of thousands of apartments and do renovations and repairs on, I think it's like $32 billion worth of repairs, which is pretty astounding.
I think it's up closer to 40. It just keeps...
Yeah. Ron, I know this is an area that you have experience in. You've co-bought a 50% stake in hundreds of public apartments back in 2014 to renovate. What is the status of those, and what kind of insights did you get from working with Nycha on that?
So that was the first public-private partnership that Nycha did. It was about 850 units scattered in 3 different boroughs, and it worked out. When we got awarded that site and when we closed, it was done very quickly, and the city got a lot of criticism. And at the end of the day, we did a lot of outreach, not only to the Nycha residents and the tenant leadership, but also to some of the electeds. And by the end of that, which was, they got a full renovation, we took over the management. Nycha is in the ownership. They are protecting against there's no profit visibility on this. Nycha controls anything that happens with any back end or any sale, which I don't see happening ever. But we do, as long as we're running the property efficiently and well, we manage the property. And I think that
So it wasn't just a renovation, you're actually managing.
Exactly. It really is a privatization in terms of the management, in terms of the operations, and in terms of the renovation. So obviously, residents who are living in a renovated building are happy, but they also are getting, we've cut the expenses by 40%, and they're getting responses very quickly to their calls, to their complaints, to maintenance needs. So I think that the tenant leadership and the residents have gone out and done a very good job of lauding that program. And on the other side of it, the problems at Nycha since 2014 have just gotten exacerbated. So right now, this is the program where there's no federal money coming in. The city can't afford to put $30 billion in. This is the program where Nycha is going to really take care of, hopefully, many of its properties.
David, what about you? Do you want to weigh in on Nycha and privatization? I know there is consideration of air rights being sold and underutilized.
Look, I think Nycha's, been a disaster. Obviously, it's many generations of deferred maintenance. It's so big. I mean, what are there, close to 200,000 units in Nycha, Ron?
173, I think.
Yeah. So
a lot.
So Ron's counted them. So, they're, again, it's a massive undertaking for anybody to run. And I think that, the city in general is, probably not the best at managing apartments. So, it's got to be fixed. I think it's, it's crazy what's happened there. But again, we can't, I think all the blame is falling on those currently in charge, but it's gone back 30, 40 years and the feds and everybody. So it's I think they're doing the right things. And right now, we have people living there, right? So we have to, even though some things might not be popular, like there are people living in these conditions today that, that as the city, we're in charge of and we're responsible for, and we have to be responsible to get revenue to fix that stuff today. So I think we have to not look for the perfect, but look for solutions. And it's probably not just one solution. I think it's many solutions, but it's such a critical issue today. So although we're not involved in it, we're very interested in it, and I think it's going to be a combination of many things to fix Nycha.
Do you think that it's an area that developers are going to be looking to in a sense for opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, 173,000 apartments in New York City, and many of you have seen some of its amazing real estate in Chelsea, or the Upper East Side, or the West Side, Williamsburg, downtown Brooklyn, Long Island City. So some of it's amazing real estate. So certainly there's a tremendous amount of interest, and then there's a tremendous amount of fear from tenants, and advocates and others, and rightfully so. Right, we have to be careful with what's done. People are worried about losing their homes in places that they've lived for 60, 70 years. So it is a fine line, and I do
definitely like a lot of fear on the tenant side.
I just want to point out there is a difference between the Rad, what's called the Rad Program, which is the renovations of Nycha housing, which really involves just converting public housing subsidies to Section 8. That's a simple version, but that program is being actively pursued by the city right now, and they've done probably 3,000 units. They have 3,000 units in renovation. They have another 5,000 units in RFP process right now, with another 5,000 or 6,000 slated for the end of the year. That is a different program, and I think that's been fairly well accepted, at least by most of the residents, tenant leaders, and advocates, as being a necessity. And that program really doesn't matter where the location of the building is.
Yeah.
What you're talking about, which also gets into the infill, air rights,
right,
the privatization and building on Nycha land raises, which
right,
would generate revenue for Nycha, but also raises a lot of fear of gentrification and loss of.
And that's what the mayor, that's what the mayor has talked about. And we understand both. Ron's 100% correct, and we understand both sides of it, even when we're developing. But, tenants are sort of saying, that are living there, well, how do I know you're not going to price me out? Maybe all of the places that I would go to, whether it's retail or, cultural things or others in the neighborhood are going to change. I'm not going to be welcome anymore. So, there is that aspect to the conversation that we don't want to overlook, because people have just seen massive change. People have fear of developers. They have fear of change. No matter who the people are, by the way, they have fear of change. People are anti-development, rich and poor, New York to California. People don't like change. So, it's a big change, and I think there's a lot of fear around it. But at the same time, there's such a need to generate revenue to fix Nycha that, because if the city takes all its revenue to fix Nycha, then you're taking away from somewhere else, right? You're taking away from other affordable housing or schools or fire or police, et cetera.
I want to get to some of your other projects as well, and I know that there are fears of gentrification everywhere. I guess, depending on who you talk to, it's either a great thing or a horrendous thing. But L&M, and this isn't meant to be a segue into Essex Crossing, but L&M is working on, almost done with Essex Crossing. The affordable housing crisis is really exacerbated throughout the lifespan of that project. And I'm just wondering, given that shift, do you think that model for large-scale affordable will sort of work as a future model going forward?
I mean, I'm wearing my green button because we just had the opening for the Essex Street Market a couple of days ago, which was incredibly well attended. For any of you who haven't been there, it's just looks great.
I know, I want to. I mean,
the transition's unbelievable.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I think that even elected officials like the Manhattan Borough President who spoke, and she said, I'm usually against developers, or against change or against taking old buildings down. And she spoke favorably about it. So did the local council member. I think that, and the community board and community task force was very involved. They spent years on figuring out how this property should be developed after it sat fallow for 40 some odd years. So in my view, Essex Crossing, and I guess I'm a little self-interested, but the way it was done,
just a little.
Well, but truthfully, we came in at the end of that community planning process, so I feel good about carrying out that plan, but a lot of that plan was dictated by the community and by the government. And I think the way it was done is a great model for development in New York City. Yes, it's new, there's glitzy buildings, there are some high market rents, we have some, potential, like Trader Joe's and Target potentially, quote, gentrifying retail uses, a movie theater, but it's what the community wanted, and it was done with a wide swath of community involvement in a community that was pretty diverse and pretty controversial, pretty much at odds. I mean, it took 40 some odd years to get there.
Between the sort of NIMBYism and financing and everything that went into that project, what would you say was like the most challenging aspect of sort of seeing it through?
Well, I think the most challenging aspect was taking the detailed community vision, which we were sort of told we should follow pretty strictly, and actually being able to, from the commercial, from the small commercial, from the retail, from the entertainment uses, from the food uses, from the affordable and non-affordable, we had to parse through a variety of retail challenges. We're still in some commercial challenges, and we had to go through and work with HPD, with HDC, and do market rate at the same time through 2 administrations. So getting this in the Bloomberg administration and being able to work through the de Blasio administration was a scary thing. Worked pretty well, but I think it was because of all the community support.
Just like not a guarantee, meaning shifting.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we didn't have that community backing, I think it would have been a much bigger challenge.
I know, obviously, community opposition is sort of a reality with any project. David, you're facing it on Fulton Street in Brooklyn, which sort of gets at the density issue Slate is proposing. I think it's like a 40-story tower there. So can you talk a little bit about that and sort of, when you think that height and density makes sense in a neighborhood, even if it's out of character?
So this is, an area you can't believe all the news you read. We first of all, we got approved, thankfully.
Oh, sorry about that.
But we actually didn't have community opposition. We had community board opposition, which is a different thing. And I think, what we're going to build there is, what I think that the community wants, because the community's actually spoken out really in favor of it. So we're building an office tower with residential on top of it. It's going to be market rate with 25% for affordable, but with all the transportation, we're going to have Brooklyn companies there. As a lot of you guys know, I mean, the Brooklyn office market is really booming as companies are coming to where the talent lives. So we think it's the right place. If New York's going to add 1 million or so people, how are you going to do it if you don't add density? Everybody wants density, just not in their neighborhood, right? So I might not be as good at math as Ron, but the math just doesn't work if you don't put it somewhere. So if you're going to put it somewhere, put it in downtown Brooklyn where you have Long Island Railroad, you have 5-6 trains, you get to Manhattan, you get to anywhere. So, we're really excited.
Sort of like major corridors, you think is where it makes
Look, I think we need to upzone the major corridors to add everybody needs housing. If we want to get out of the affordable housing crisis, we need to build more housing. Affordable market rate, super low income homeless. You need to build all of it, and we need to do it in the major. I'm not saying everywhere we should, destroy brownstone Brooklyn and, the West Village and everything, but where we do have major corridors, we should be building big in order to get everybody. Plus, if we put people more in cores in the city and areas like that, it's gonna take down on transportation costs and emissions and all the energy costs if we have people that are closer. So it's just good for everyone. And usually you find there are just a few local interested groups that are really against the density, but the people that are for it don't show up to community board meetings and don't make their voices heard. The people who are against it, they show up.
Ron, not to get stuck on the opposition issue, but you're dealing with opposition at 2 bridges where you're one of 4 developers, and the city council and borough president are suing. Scale is one of the issues there. Why do you think the scale of that project makes sense in that location?
Well, first of all, we're doing that according to the city it's an as of right project, and I agree with David. I mean, putting scale and density and height on the water, which that's usually where it's done in the city, in places where it's not going to impact neighborhoods in the same way. Obviously, there's going to be people who see their neighborhood, wherever that neighborhood is, differently and oppose that kind of scale and that kind of density. And that's why we have a zoning code. So that one was not even a rezoning. That was an as-of-right project.
I know that there was a push to go through ULURP.
Well, there was a push by the community board and by the local councilwoman, who we happen to be on very good terms with, and they think it's too dense. They don't think that the city went through a process that they should have. And
it's really the city's.
It is the city's issue. I mean, we're just following the code. We think it makes sense. We're building, I think there's a couple of thousand units of affordable housing that'll get done out of MIH down there. And personally, I don't have strong views on the zoning aspects of it, but I do think in general, those kind of projects.
And Lower Manhattan needs affordable housing units. Yeah. Again, I'm not at all involved in any of that stuff over there, but I live in Lower Manhattan. Lower Manhattan needs affordable housing units. And
the only way you're going to get affordable housing in places like the Lower East Side, or even most places in Manhattan, is through programs like MIH, because the city can't afford to subsidize land cost and construction cost in high value neighborhoods. I mean, you can't buy land for $400 a foot and have the city subsidize affordable housing. So
I wish I could find some land. If you have any $400 a foot, let me know.
So in this case, the city is getting 1,000 or 2,000, I don't remember what the total number is, of free affordable housing. It doesn't cost them anything. And I think people miss that sometimes.
So it's like 700 units of affordable there?
It's 30%. So maybe it's 700 units.
I think the thing that people miss is that it is one pot of money. So if you get these units for free, then you can spend the money elsewhere for other kinds of units. So it's like people, I think, always miss that, because sometimes the city, when it gets a lot of pressure, will over-subsidize one project, but really what's happening is they're taking away from somewhere else. I mean, they only have so much money.
I just want to shift again into homelessness. I know that that's an area that Slate has been getting more involved in. Can you talk a little bit about why
Sure.
those projects make sense for you?
Yeah, so, homelessness is a national crisis. New York City has 60,000 homeless people. Think about that for a second, right? The richest city in the country. We have a lot of things going on in terms of the opioid crisis, which has been more people died from drug overdoses last year than the peak year of AIDS. So just to put that into perspective. And now we have this national thing where actually one of the few things that the left and the right can agree on criminal justice reform, right? You have the ultra left on it, you even have the Koch brothers and the president. So it's something that we're all doing, but we're thinking, what do we do when we let folks out of prison that have been unjustly thrown in jail? What's the housing policy with that, with the homeless crisis? So we see it as a tremendous need right now, and we want to, we're figuring out ways to do it in a better fashion. And I can tell you that there's tremendous interest from people around the country on how to figure that out, both from the philanthropic standpoint and the investment standpoint. People want to figure out, we have a crisis. It's humongous. I mean, think about it, 60,000 people, right? That's a humongous issue, and unfortunately it's something that's continuing to rise. So it's something that we're still edging up, and that's even before we let people out of prison. So we see it as a huge need, and that's why we're really focused, and we think it's certainly a hard road. Nobody wants, as much as they don't want Ron's developments near them, they certainly don't want a homeless shelter. So it's going to be, but again, it has to go somewhere.
Now, the Real Deal recently wrote about this issue and about how more real estate players are leasing buildings to homeless shelter providers who have sort of lucrative contracts with the city and can pay a premium. And it's sort of the same criticism that, should real estate players be profiting off of this sector? We talked a little bit about this in advance, but can you sort of respond to that?
Look, I think the city, no different than anything else, affordable housing. Again, I don't know the contracts and the deals, but we have a homeless crisis. We have to figure out how to house people both transitionally and then permanent housing. I mean, the city and the state have done a great job at putting a lot of money into permanent affordable housing for formerly homeless, of which we're building a lot of that stuff. But again, there is still that need for the shelter system, because you need to, when people end up homeless, you need to understand why they're homeless and put them into the right situations. So I think that, unfortunately, a lot of the facilities that were built in the past were just not done well. They were put all in one area. But, Jill, the point you bring up is good. Like, should there be profit? I think the first thing is we have to deal with this crisis, right? Let's deal with, it's like there's leaks in buildings all over the place. We have to deal with the crisis.
And you had sort of mentioned, though, that you don't think that this space will be able to attract the capital it needs if there's not some sort of premium in place.
Well, no space can attract capital. I mean, there's a reason that the low-income housing tax credit, which is what's used, is created out of the '86 tax code. I mean, affordable housing since the beginning has had profit to it. If there's no profit, people don't build. So, Section 8 before it, there needs to be some profit.
I also think that it should be profit there should be reasonable profit, but really what the focus should be is on operators, whether they're for-profit or non-profit, who are responsible. And I think what's happened in this industry is it's been dominated by some people who may not be as responsible, and some of this is just coming from.
Do you want to call anyone out?
No. I don't even know the people. I just know that the conditions, in the affordable housing industry in general, they're pretty well maintained and pretty well monitored and pretty well regulated. The homeless area seems to have a lot more issues, and you read a lot more in the paper about buildings that are not well kept up, that are not in conformance with code, and other things that really leave you wondering about the system. So I don't know if I'm not sure it's all about profit or not profit. I mean, that should be considered when the city's spending resources, but it's also about who they're working.
It's getting the good actors. You know, one thing is that we're trying to encourage other developers that do the right thing to get into this because, and again, a lot of the formerly homeless stuff is done through the city agencies, HPD, HDC, as well as the state, which I think is done, you know, very well and responsibly. I think that it's an area that's grown so much, so I think the city is figuring out right now the right way to deal with it. But it, you know, somebody explained it to me. It's like triage, right? You know, you have this immediate need to house people, so planning is, you know, the guy that's talking about planning, and you're like, the guy needs surgery today. Don't talk about what we're going to do in 2 years from now. And that's, you know, one of the challenges. So I think, yes, we should plan for it, but also they need beds tonight.
I just want to sort of, I think we need to wrap up in a few minutes, but just want to talk about other sort of opportunity areas that you see in the affordable housing space. Ron, in late 2018, The Real Deal reported on L&M launching a $500 million private equity fund. I know that L&M hasn't really talked about that publicly, but I was wondering if there's anything that you could say on that front or anything that you wanted to tell us on that today.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to say about that. I think that the workforce, the fund that we're working on, that we have been, and we've been doing investment in workforce housing for many years, for about 10 years now. I think the workforce space, which I think is a subsection of the affordable space, is an area where there is a lot of opportunity. It is more difficult in New York City because, as David mentioned, when he defined affordable housing, he sort of defined affordable housing as anything that wasn't market. I look at workforce as being much closer to market, and I think in a regional sense, there is workforce housing available in the region. Probably some parts of the Bronx, maybe some parts of Queens and Staten Island, and even Brooklyn. But you go to Newark, or you go to, you know, we're doing work in New Rochelle or Hempstead. You know, areas are within a 30 to 45-minute commuting distance of the city. There is available workforce housing, and I think that's an opportunity. And I also think what our fund concentrates on is acquisition of workforce housing, where there is a public-private aspect, but there's not real subsidies. There may be tax benefits or rent programs that come out where we can keep housing more affordable. We're not aggressively churning units or moving rents, keep housing more affordable and still make returns. So I think in the private sector there is the availability to make market returns without, you know, really, you know, driving rents too hard.
David?
Yeah, I totally agree. First of all, I hope L&M's giving us some of that $500 million to buy housing, but we could talk about that after. I think, you know, I agree with Ron 100%. Workforce housing is, so first of all, it's such a hot sector. If you talk to investors and you say, oh, we're doing workforce housing, everybody's interested. You tell them luxury condo, they delete your, you know, they delete your phone number. So, you know, it's a very interesting sector nationally. We have presidential candidates now talking about housing and zoning. You know, it's something, you know, we're looking at stuff out in California and LA. I mean, it's big news there. It's big news here. You know, we're very interested in it also because, you know, the thing about affordable housing is it's like a huge spectrum, right? It's from, you know, people that are in New York. I mean, workforce housing could be in the $2,000-ish a month kind of thing. So it's really from zero up to there. So it's a lot of, you know, the sector. And I just think it's a growing sector. I also think that from real estate investment, it's very stable. You know, you get into that, it's a stable income stream. People are, you know, it's not like some of the stuff where 30, 40, 50% of your tenants are moving every year. So you're getting into some of the stuff where people are just staying. It's steady income. You don't have all the turnovers. And if you're building real estate to hold, I think it could be really attractive as opposed to just, you know, the flipping, you know, kind of stuff.
Okay, I don't mean to cut you off, but I want to see if we have maybe one or two audience questions. Okay. Go ahead. What was that? What part of the funding comes from the government?
So on a typical new construction, affordable housing development, and again, some of this depends on what rent levels. One of the reasons the city likes to do mixed income is because They don't have to subsidize the higher income levels as much as they do the deep income levels. But typical affordable, 100% affordable housing, you probably get about a third of the capital stack from private debt. You'd probably get about a third of it, and this is rough, maybe a third to 40% from tax credits, which come from, generally these days come from tax-exempt bonds. If you used 9% tax credits, it would be a larger percentage, but most of the bigger projects in New York City get done with tax-exempt bonds. And then about 25 to 30% of that would come from government low-interest loans. So, you know, generally around 40-30 is what I would say. So 70% of it, either directly or indirectly, comes from government sources.
Do we have?
30% is debt is conventional debt that's serviced by the rents that are paid in the building. So let's say an affordable rent is $900 a month. The expenses are $600 a month. That $300 differential will service debt that will pay for 30%, roughly 30% of the building. The 40% will be investment from private institutions, but they're buying tax credits that the government is making available. So it's sort of free equity, it's government-driven equity. And then the last 30% is city or state money that comes in through the form of a low-interest subordinate loan.
Okay, I think we have to call it there, actually. We're running a little bit over, but I just wanted to thank our panelists. You guys were both so insightful, and I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.